Regarding debates in the literature in this field, there's a long list, which in a way makes it quite an exciting field. Some of the ones that I've been aware of over the last few years, debates around whether we should be distinguishing scholarship of teaching and learning from scholarly teaching, whether we should be distinguishing it from educational research. And my background is in education and higher ed, so I bump into that all the time. I think we've had quite a few debates around the language and the terminology, and maybe, as befits an evolving field, concerns about what is SoTL and what is not. And, I bumped into a colleague who's still at this conference saying, I don't really know if I'm doing SoTL, but I think I am, and I wanted to come and find out. So I do adult developmental psychology. I think we're having a bit of an identity crisis, but we're moving through it, so it'll be okay.
It's a lively field, SoTL, and so there are lots of different ways where we differ. I mean, it's a wide, diverse range of people in terms of intellectual background and in terms of tastes of evidence. Sometimes it turns into a tension. I'm guessing that with our new journal, we may end up seeing some of that tension, though we intentionally picked editors who cover the range. So there isn't a particular methodological constraint built into who's editing the journal. One big difference is in social science versus more humanities methods. To me, I think both are good systematic ways of making and learning from observations, whether it's a close reading of text or a random assignment of students to 2 treatments. I can learn something from both. What I really care about most myself is that person's professional knowledge is used to evaluate the products. And do I expect every SoTL project to define and answer a question in forever? Probably not. But if there is interesting student work and there is clear systematic professional judgment made on the quality of that, and that person can say this is deeper than I was seeing last year, or possibly includes last year, or it's been sustained over several years, so I don't think it's just a cohort effect. I'm happy with that. My colleagues in experimental psychology don't see it that way. If you don't have random assignment, you don't have inferential statistics, it's not really something you can conclude. So that tension is in there.
I think one of the tensions in this field that I've been most close to is about methods and about what it is we're trying to do, because underlying the methods is a question about the nature of knowledge and the nature of, not to sound highfalutin about it, but the nature of truth. And much of that falls to the social science versus humanities models of scholarship of teaching and learning that connect with those disciplines, how they're practiced in the field, if you will. Several years ago at an SoTL conference, I left a session where somebody had been presenting a paper that he'd written with a colleague, and the colleague was the statistician on the paper. And so when the guy gave the presentation, he said, I'm going to talk about the statistics. I don't really understand statistics as well as I probably should, but here's what my colleague found, and here's what I think. And the session went on. It was all good. I left the session and I got out into the hallway and I overheard somebody talking about that session saying, well, if you don't understand statistics, you don't belong at this conference. I was happily right on my way to a meeting of the Humanities Interest Group and was able to vent a little bit. But it got me thinking about, what is it that statistics offer that is different from the way I do research offers? Because I do almost nothing that's numbers. Like many humanists, I read my students' work as texts, and I read it closely, and I read it critically, and I look for patterns that connect texts. So when I do my research, I tend to sit down with a collection of students' writing and read it and make notes and underline and mark things and look for the threads and the things that can connect it. And I'm also interested in the things that are different. What is that one student who's doing it differently doing?
One that I'm very aware of, because my field is English, is a tension. It's a methodological tension. I think in many settings, the methods of the social sciences seem to rise to the top and appear to take over. As someone in the humanities, I want to resist that, but it's sometimes hard to do. Many of my colleagues and I have been really working hard to insist that one of the things everyone needs to do is to bring, again, the habits and values and methods of their own discipline to this work. So historians can bring a sense of history to the work. Folks like me from English who study literature can bring the close analysis of a text to the work, and so forth. So, there's a methodological tension. And I think just continually reminding ourselves that this is work that comes out of and reflects disciplinary methods, questions, and values is an important theme in the work.
The way the field has emerged in the United States in particular, we come up against the expectation that we do social science research. If you're going to study your students' learning, well, you need to have pre-tests and post-tests and do some kind of statistical analysis, and you need a large N, and all of these other things that are completely outside of our expertise.
I think the main debate that I see, or controversy, is around the notion of evidence. What constitutes knowledge about something? And in this particular case, it's knowledge about teaching and learning. And I think it would be wrong to assume that any one set of disciplines, natural science, social science, humanities, has the answer to that question, and that the rest of us need to follow along and do the same type of work. I think one of SoTL's values, I think, as a new concept in higher education in teaching and learning, is that it can explode the notion of evidence and get us to rethink what we've come to believe as evidence. Someone said to me once that for natural scientists, evidence is 99.9% replicability. For social science, its P is less than 0.05, whatever that means. For the humanities, which I'm one, finding one other person who agrees with you. Now, all of those are forms of evidence, depending on who you're talking to. And I think that openness, or at least the need to ask the question about what is evidence, is what SoTL brings to the field, and what new people can bring to SoTL, their perspectives, especially people who are involved in interdisciplinary work.
I think that new scholars would benefit from knowing about the controversy of some people in terms of one's disciplinary lens. It's a large umbrella that welcomes both humanities, social science, science faculty, and sometimes people feel like it leans too much towards the social science research, which I'm a little biased because I am a social science researcher, but there's room for all disciplines, all lenses, and so humanities play a big role in SoTL, although a developing role. It's probably more established for social science researchers and scientific method.
One of those tensions has to do with the relationship of the scholarship of teaching and learning to the whole body of research and literature that comes out of education, psychology, neuroscience these days, even professional development fields, what you might call the learning sciences. For many people, it's a road into that literature, but it's not. Doing the scholarship of teaching and learning isn't necessarily the same as doing that kind of research. Some people might be motivated to try that kind of research. But for the most part, that's not what it's about. It's about what some people might call reflective practice, practitioner inquiry. It's about taking a close look at what's happening in front of you, the student work, the student experience that you are part of as a teacher, or the experience in your program, not just in your own course. That is not the same as being a formal education researcher. It doesn't mean that the work is less important or even necessarily less rigorous. It just is a different kind of enterprise. And it's important to think that through when you get going, because people are going to ask you about that, and you may not know right away. I know that for myself, the thought of entering that world of the research of the learning sciences, of education research, was not a very welcome thought. I was not interested in doing that. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm interested in teaching and learning anthropology and related areas, and I wanted to learn more about how students learn in those fields. I had discipline-specific questions, and I expected my colleagues who teach more than I do would have those kinds of questions and would not be drawn towards it. They would not see becoming an education researcher as an invitation. They would see that as a barrier. So it's good to find your own answer to that and to realize that there are a range of answers possible.
Important debate that has taken place in the SoTL community, if you like, over the past few years, quite a few years, I think, is around whether SoTL is a theoretical field or not. So the extent to which we use theory in our reflections and inquiries, and also, so that's one aspect, and also the variety of theories that are being used and the extent to which it being such a diverse theoretical field, it actually can be coming across as a rigorous field. And I think it is likely that this is one of the debates that a newcomer to SoTL would come across. And I think the work of Mary Huber and Pat Hutchings on this is extremely illuminating, and particularly the way they've identified how you can bring your own theoretical frameworks to your practice, i.e. your own discipline-based theories, to your practice to examine your practice. That I think is very interesting. They've called this the big tent, SoTL being a big tent, which it is, and that to me is one of the big debates in SoTL. There are many others, of course, but that's the one I would find interesting. And I might come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter very much. There are so many benefits from engaging in SoTL that whether you are more or less theoretical may not matter as much as one thinks initially.
It is a field that's rich with opportunity, and it is a field that's rich with debate. And I say rich with debate, not fraught with debate. There's a big difference. So we could pick a number of debates or controversies, contentions, confusions within the field because it's complex and it's invited a lot of people in, people of a lot of different stripes. So as soon as you do that, you are welcoming differing points of view, differing understandings, differing language. So if I was to pick one of those, let's say, okay, let's pick a whopper just for fun. The whole conception of what research actually is. That is a wonderfully contentious issue within the scholarship of teaching and learning. So I've written a chapter for a book edited by Kathleen McKinney, and I think the chapter is called Square One, What is Research? I mean, that fundamental a question that you're not going to see asked in physics now. But I work in medical education, where a number of my colleagues believe the gold standard is a randomized controlled trial. That to them is research. If you're not randomly assigning either people to conditions, or at the very least some kind of intervention to one group or rather than another, if you're not making those kinds of comparisons, you're actually not doing research. So to do qualitative research, or to do research that actually isn't about whether or not something works, but rather just to try to describe the complexities of the classroom, let's say, I have colleagues who need to be convinced that that's even research at all, much less that it's, valuable, useful research that should inform their practice. As one of my colleagues said in a completely different field, art education, after coming away from a meeting on SoTL where there were people from medicine there, she said, "Gary, why are people so hung up on cause and effect?" And I said, I don't think those people would consider that a hang-up.
There are these different cultures. And as in many interdisciplinary fields, what we have going on in scholarship of teaching and learning is different cultures coming together. And one of our great challenges is figuring out how do we navigate that. And for people like me coming out of the humanities, one of the challenges is how do we make available models for how to do scholarship of teaching and learning that build on the disciplinary expertise of the people who are doing it. One of the ideas that drew me into scholarship of teaching and learning was the notion that it was grounded in disciplines, and that I should be able to use the theories and methods and approaches and assumptions and culture and values and all of those things of my discipline in studying students' learning in my discipline. And I still believe that very firmly. But I also know how often people, especially in the humanities, look at scholarship of teaching and learning say, I don't really do scholarship of teaching and learning because I'm not doing that. And you might have heard me do this. I go to sessions at the conference every year and find myself standing up at the end of the session and saying about somebody's presentation, which they prefaced by saying, I'm a humanist, I don't really do scholarship of teaching and learning, but here's what I looked at in my class and here's what I saw. To say, yes, you are doing scholarship of teaching and learning. There's a very wide range of ways of doing it. I think that's one of the key challenges that we have to get through, one of many, and we've got lots of border crossing issues in this field. For me, that's the one that's most salient.